Do you remember when you went to the cinema to watch the 2012 movie The Avengers? If you had a similar experience to mine, you probably left the theater amazed by it. And it's because seeing these characters that you had seen throughout several movies interacting for the first time in a story against a common enemy was something impressive. In fact, so much so that the movie had an excellent reception, both from the public and from the critics. However, if you watch the movie today, 8 years after its premiere, the film seems to have lost some of its original magic. Currently, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the most successful franchise in the history of cinema, which has managed to raise more than $22 billion through its more than 20 films, an amount that represents more than double what Star Wars has raised. 3 times the franchise of James Bond, and even is an amount greater than the individual gross domestic product of 87 of the 193 countries in the world. This is because, under the creative leadership of Kevin Feige, Marvel has consolidated its superheroes as a brand whose films have a very specific stamp. A mix of classic heroism, action and comedy that is particularly appealing to the population. It doesn't matter if you're a fan of comics or not, Marvel has made it their task to make their movies enjoyable for the general public. However, like every giant, the Marvel Cinematic Universe today has a very strong weak point, which is precisely what makes the Avengers currently feel much older than it actually is, and is also the cause of some of the brand's movies feeling forgettable. That's why today we're going to thoroughly analyze the Marvel Cinematic Universe, comparing the performance and the type of stories they told during their first 3 phases, to be able to see what this underlying problem they have is, and if Marvel will be able to solve it in its 4th phase to continue enjoying the success they have today. Remember, my comics history course is out now with a great intro price until January 7th. It won't cost you more than a single comic book. It's about 32 videos in which I explain how the evolution of the superhero has been from the classic stories of World War II to highly political comics like Watchmen or Civil War. In addition, it includes infographics, checklists with the most important comics of each era, and quizzes to measure your knowledge. Chapter 1: Understanding Marvel's Success. If we want to fully understand Marvel's weakness, we first need to know the reasons that made its franchise successful in the first place. And for this, we have to start by saying that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was not formed with the company's most popular superheroes, but with those that were still available. This is because a decade before this universe began, Marvel had sold the film rights of its most popular characters, like Spider-Man and the X-Men, to other companies, while it kept its lesser-known properties, like Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, who were popular among comic fans but were not really well known to the general public. But interestingly, this apparent disadvantage was one of the key points of success for these films. As being relatively unknown characters, Kevin Feige and his directors were able to give these superheroes a new personality that worked well within the franchise. That's why nobody complained that characters like Thor had a sense of humor that they don't have in the comic, while characters like Superman and Batman are more limited in this sense, as everyone has a very strong opinion of what they should or should not be. But these advantages and this ambition to create the largest cinematic universe in history mean nothing without good movies to support it. Fortunately, Jon Favreau, who is now known as Saint Jon Favreau, patron and Lord of Star Wars fans, had a very clear idea of what he wanted to do with his Iron Man movie in 2008. Jon Favreau didn't want to make just another superhero movie. Remember that he played Foggy Nelson in the infamous Daredevil movie of 2003, so he had excellent motivation to do things right. However, making the decision to take the Iron Man movie in the direction we know was surely not easy. Remember that by this time the world had already seen successes of superhero franchises like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Bryan Singer's X-Men, franchises that presented us with movies with a classic heroism that were not particularly deep in their discourse but were highly accepted by the public as good and entertaining superhero movies. However, both franchises failed with their third installment, and other movies like Catwoman, Green Lantern, or The Fantastic Four were showing signs that these types of movies were starting to fail. While other types of comic movies like 5 for 5 Vendetta or Batman Begins, which had a much deeper discourse, began to be more accepted. However, Marvel, instead of going down this darker path, which would later have a great influence on the DC Extended Universe, decided to bet on classic heroism movies that are more to the liking of the general public, but that does not mean that Iron Man was an empty movie for being simple. In fact, the movie was an excellent first installment that, behind the action scenes and AC/DC music, presented us with a quite interesting discourse. In the words of Favreau himself, Iron Man is the story of an adult man who literally reinvents himself after discovering that the world is much more complex than he originally thought. That's why, in the film, we see how Robert Downey Jr. masterfully portrays a man whose conception of life dramatically changes after a traumatic event and decides to start a path towards redemption through the Iron Man armor and deal with the morality behind the legal sale of weapons. This action comedy approach at the time that seemed to be going in a completely different direction, and Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal as Tony Stark were the foundations of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But now we have to see how these factors play a role in the weakness of this universe. Chapter 2: The Weakness of Marvel. At the end of the Iron Man movie, there was a post-credit scene where Nick Fury mentions the Avengers Initiative. Something that would break the internet today, but in 2008 it really wasn't such a big deal. However, in the following years, the same Fury appeared in other post-credit scenes from movies like Thor or Captain America, also proposing this idea. Similarly, we saw Tony Stark talking to General Ross in the Hulk movie, which resulted in Marvel slowly creating a great expectation for the movie that would finally bring all these heroes together. By the time the movie was released, the world was already very excited to see all these characters we met throughout the first 5 movies come together in a big battle against Loki. The result was that the Avengers became one of the most successful movies in history up to that point. This success made Marvel want to replicate its formula in Phase 2. However, they would realize that things don't always work as well twice. Marvel's idea in Phase 2 was to continue introducing us to more characters from their universe in movies like Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man, and to launch the sequels of the movies that worked best for them in Phase 1. In this case, we have Iron Man 3, Winter Soldier and The Dark World, and then reunite the Avengers again with some new members in the movie Age of Ultron, which, like its predecessor, was also written and directed by Joss Whedon, when he was not yet hated by half the world. The problem is that this time the audience was not as satisfied with the result, and the question is why? One of the strongest points is the fact that the audience did not fully connect with the villain Ultron. Let's remember that in those days, Marvel had a serious problem with its antagonists who, for the most part, were completely forgettable characters or with absurd or caricatured motivations. Fortunately, as the years have gone by, we have seen some improvements in villains like Killmonger, Zemo, Thanos or Kais. No, not you, Kaecilius, you're still ridiculous. However, there's another very important factor at play, and it's the fact that a big part of the magic of the Avengers movie was seeing these characters interact with each other for the first time. The second time you do it, it simply doesn't have the same impact. In fact, that's why this movie has aged so quickly, because we're now used to seeing many more heroes together, and now without that magic we realize that the story wasn't as good as we thought back in 2012. Marvel identified and corrected several of these issues for their new phase. The first thing Marvel did was realize that Tony Stark only had one good movie, the first one. However, this character was one of the main reasons why the audience watched the movies, so they decided to include him in other films like Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming, where I definitely don't like seeing him, in addition to the Avengers movies. Then they had the Russo brothers, who directed the only good sequel Marvel had had to date, The Winter Soldier, also direct the Civil War movie, where now we not only saw many heroes together, like in Age of Ultron, but we saw them facing off against each other over an ethical dilemma, in which we fans could discuss which of the two points of view was correct, whether it was Captain America's or Iron Man's. They also directed the two movies of this Avengers phase, which brought together the heroes from the 21 movies that came before in an epic battle that, honestly, is one of my favorite scenes from all superhero cinema. I literally screamed in the cinema when Captain America said Avengers Assemble, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Unfortunately, this exposes the original problem of Marvel. Think about it this way. If we already have the movie where all the Avengers appear, and we already have the movie where they fight each other, and we also have the movie where we bring together the umpteen characters we have in an epic battle. What's next? To see a video about the biggest problem of the DC Extended Universe, subscribe to the channel. We'll make it when we reach 240,000 subscribers. One of the strongest cards today for the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the question of the multiverse, through which they could bring back actors from other franchises, which would surely be something that would fascinate us. But we have to take into account that this factor of awe in which we see more and more heroes or heroes from other movies will eventually stop working, and Marvel will have to bet more on the fact of making good movies that work by themselves, not because of the awe factor. And in this sense, I think Marvel exposes another of its weaknesses, the fact that Kevin Feige, its creative director, keeps his directors very much in check, which results in this universe having a great coherence in terms of tone, but also results in the fact that many of its movies look too much like each other. And personally, I think this is the reason why many of the movies in this universe feel forgettable, because it seems like it's something you've seen many times before. It's not that they're bad, as you certainly enjoy them in the movie theater, but a couple of weeks after watching them, you get the feeling that they're movies that don't matter much anymore. I personally experienced this with several movies in this universe. In fact, after analyzing it a bit, the movies I enjoy the most from this franchise are those that have a more particular style, where the director was able to say a bit more than what Kevin Feige asked for, or those that have a more defined personality. It happens to me with Winter Soldier from the Russo brothers, which is a mix of action and political thriller that really raises interesting questions about security and freedom. Guardians of the Galaxy by James Gunn, a movie that has a quite peculiar humor with references to pop culture. Black Panther by Ryan Coogler, which truly speaks to us about black culture and the systematic oppression that is being experienced in the world, and with Iron Man, the movie that started it all. The point is that, in my opinion, Marvel has to take a bit of a risk and give their directors more creative freedom to link superhero cinema with other genres or present us with movies with different focuses if they want to continue enjoying the success they have since. Within the resource of I'm going to put all my heroes in one movie will stop working. It's true that Endgame was the highest grossing movie in history, which could indicate that the success of superhero movies is far from disappearing. But it's also true that there are many people who are already saying that some movies of this genre already feel like a formula, not only in Marvel but also with DC movies like Aquaman or Wonder Woman 84. Fortunately, superheroes are characters that always adapt to social circumstances, and when a film genre drops in popularity, we start to see movies that present us with very interesting variations of it, just as it happened with cowboy movies. These are movies that already rethink the cliches that have been used and present us with novel ways of seeing these characters. The question is whether it will be Marvel or DC or another completely different company that will take the first step in this direction. But that's my opinion. However, now I would love for you to tell me in the comments if any of the Marvel movies seem forgettable to you, and if you also think that Avengers or any other movie aged poorly. That's all for today. I am Go, the Geek Monitor, and keep looking beyond the obvious.